So this video is going to just cover your Chapter 17. Chapter 17 in your textbook deals with food allergies and intolerances. I know many folks today suffer from either just an allergy, they're allergic to not only environmental things like pollen and cats and dogs, but also they're allergic to different foods as well. So many people do, feel like if they experience an adverse reaction with a food item that they're automatically allergic to that food. And sometimes they will eliminate that particular food from the diet altogether, not knowing for sure if it's an actual allergy or maybe it was just a one-time deal or it was just intolerance that they might have with the food. So getting tested and finding out for sure if it's an allergy is really important, because if we eliminate some key foods from our diet, that means we're also eliminating some important nutrients as well. So we want to make sure if we think we have an allergy that we do get tested for it. So many people today do suffer from allergies. It's not a huge, chunk of the population as far as foods go. So 3% in adults, 6% in children, but 20 to 30% of the general public believe that they're allergic to one or more foods, but they don't have the actual testing behind to prove it. So that's something to think about. So why do we experience these adverse reactions to different foods that we eat? Well, number one, it could be food poisoning, right? Many people suffer food poisoning, so that could be a reason why we're experiencing this gastric upset and distress that we're going through. Or it could be an actual food allergy. And when we're actually allergic to something, what's happening is your body's immune system is actually triggered. So when your immune system is triggered, it is triggered because your body sees something harmful in that food. So it triggers that immune system, and that's when you see the outward, signs and symptoms of that allergic reaction. Or it could be an intolerance. An intolerance is not triggering the immune system. Even though we might suffer the same outward signs and symptoms that we do from an actual food allergy, when we have a food intolerance, the immune system is actually not involved in the process at all. Okay, so that's the big difference between an allergy versus an intolerance. An allergy, the body's immune system is engaged, okay, because your body sees something harmful in that food, and that harmful substance is called an allergen. An intolerance, on the other hand, the immune system is not triggered. So even though we might exhibit some of the same signs and symptoms, we are not involving the immune system in a food intolerance. So many people can tolerate small amounts of these particular foods. If it's just an intolerance, they might be able to tolerate it in small amounts. If it's an allergy, a lot of times they can't tolerate it at all. So, as far as what's going on in the food allergy, process, what's happening is when you ingest the food, your body identifies something in the food as being harmful. And like I said, that's called an allergen. Okay, and when the allergen is released in the body triggers the immune system response. Okay, and so when the immune system is triggered, your body starts to release antibodies in response to this allergen that's being released in our body. And when antibodies are released, that's when we secrete histamine, and that causes those physical outward signs and symptoms. So for histamine, it can cause a dilation in your blood vessels. Your skin becomes red because that blood is being, pushed towards the surface. Itching, hives, there's a drop in blood pressure, a release in stomach acids. Those are all a result of the histamine. So these are some common food items that people are generally allergic to. So fish and shellfish are big ones. Dairy products are one. Even nuts are pretty common as well for folks. So here's that general flow chart of what allergic reaction looks like. So we consume the food, okay? That allergen is consumed by that person who's susceptible to that allergen. So remember, an allergen is a substance that's found in the food that your body sees as being harmful. So in response to that allergen, your body releases antibodies. Okay, nothing usually happens. Then if we consume that food again though, okay, we're exposed to that allergen a second time, the antibodies that have been released previously now cause histamine to be released. And in response to the histamine being released, you have that allergic reaction. So therefore, um, the rash, is a pretty common, skin eruptions are pretty common outward signs and symptoms that somebody's suffering an allergic reaction. So the most common signs are the rash, diarrhea, congestion, wheezing. Those are pretty common. Anaphylactic shock, on the other hand, for folks who are severely and deathly allergic to, different foods. Anaphylactic shock is when they can't breathe, basically. So in response to that, those people can be saved by using an epinephrine pen. So those folks who are, deathly allergic to certain food items or certain things like bee stings, for example, is a common one. They have to have that epinephrine pen that's designed to go through clothing, and just a simple injection of that can allow those airways to be opened back up so they can breathe again. So again, common, symptoms, just a rash, that's a pretty common symptom. But as far as the percentage of people who have these outward signs and symptoms, skin eruptions are the most common. So 84% of folks just have the skin eruptions. 52% of folks have that GI upset. They get the diarrhea, the cramps, they're nauseous as a result of ingesting that food. And then only 32% suffer that respiratory distress or respiratory problems. So here we have what we call the big eight. These are the big eight that, we tend to see most of the allergic reactions for folks today. And that's why, they call it the big eight, because that's pretty common for folks, to have some sort of a reaction to these different food items. But in 2004, the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act was actually put into place, where the list of ingredients now has to clearly state if the food contains one or more of those big eight, because some folks, like I said, are deathly allergic to foods that even being in a room where it's prepared and smelling it can set them off into an allergic reaction. Or touching a surface that maybe that food was sitting on, even though they didn't necessarily eat it, can lead them into that severe allergic reaction. So even if it's in a trace amount or minute amount, those big eight foods have to be listed on the list of ingredients, especially for those consumers that have those really severe allergic reactions. Some other allergies that folks have are to wheat. Okay, wheat allergies are called celiac disease, and this is an autoimmune disease. Autoimmune means the body attacks itself. And it's characterized by inflammation of that small intestine lining that results in that gluten intolerance. So some of the common signs and symptoms that people have as far as ingesting wheat is the GI issues. So they have diarrhea, they have fatty stools, they have weight loss in response to that. And of course, since they have diarrhea, they're not absorbing the vitamins and minerals in those foods that they're eating. So how do people get around this? Well, the best thing they can do is just go gluten-free. And they find when they do ingest gluten-free foods, they don't have the gastrointestinal upset. Celiac disease is something that's been underdiagnosed because people don't want to go through the testing to figure out if they actually have this disorder or not. But the gold standard for diagnosing celiac disease is a small bowel biopsy. So like I said, not a lot of people want to go through that. They, go through life thinking that I'm just allergic to wheat, so I'm just going to, eliminate gluten totally from my diet, and then I'll be fine. So here you can see on the left foods that do contain gluten, and on the right foods that are gluten-free. And they're they're labeled well today because a lot of people suffer a gastrointestinal distress as a result of the gluten. So manufacturers have definitely made it easy for us to determine, what foods do and don't have gluten in them. So how do we diagnose if there is an actual food allergy? Well, there's many tests. The gold standard is the double-blind, placebo-controlled food challenge, but that's administered under medical supervision. It's pretty in depth, but there are other tests like the skin prick test is pretty popular for folks. Just basically exposing a droplet of the food or the allergen on their skin, and if they have a raised portion and a kind of a red rash around that, we know that whatever that droplet was, that that person is allergic to that. So they can do skin prick tests, on your back, which is a common site to determine, what are you allergic to? And like I said, not only for foods, but many people have environmental allergies like pollen and ragweed and things like that, and animals. So finding out what they're allergic to is very, very helpful. And as far as a food allergy, if you find out that you're allergic to something, the best thing to do is, you know, eliminate that food from your diet, right? Just get rid of it altogether. That way you don't have to worry about experiencing those adverse effects of the uh, allergic reaction. And again, if it's a severe anaphylaxis, is something that you have a severe allergy, we want to make sure that we have those epinephrine pens and wear your medical ID bracelet if you have a severe food allergy. And then even allergy shots for especially for environmental. There's not really allergy shots for food allergens as of yet, but for environmental, things like the pollen and things like that, you can go and get allergy shots. And my son is one who has done this for the past year, actually. He started going once a week. And then now, at this point, he's down to once every 3 to 4 weeks, or if he experiences more of a more outward signs and symptoms at different times of the year, we might take him in, every week to get a shot. But basically what they're doing is they're exposing him to those allergens that he is allergic to, so his body will start to see them as not harmless, and therefore it will not exhibit those, outward rashes and, the congestion and the difficulty breathing and things like that. So there are allergy shots available for environmental allergies, but not necessarily for food allergies. So immunotherapy does show promise. So exposing them to different foods over time, they tend to get, little amounts tends to help. For kids, for young ones, allergies to cow's milk, wheat, and eggs, we tend to see them outgrow it as they get older. So even though we might take it out of their diet when they're young, expose them to it again at some point to see if maybe they outgrew that particular allergy, because a lot of times we will do so. So there's no rationale for eliminating foods during pregnancy or breastfeeding or childhood to prevent allergies. Family history of food allergies is really the most important factor. So if you have a strong family history of an allergy to something environmental or a food, then there's a good chance you might have it as well. Food intolerances, like I said, do not involve the immune system, okay, but due to missing an enzyme that will help break down that particular food item, they tend to suffer these outward signs and symptoms. So common food intolerances, lead to just fatigue, sometimes joint pain, diarrhea, gastrointestinal upset is pretty common, bloating, rashes. These are foods that are linked with intolerances. Remember, they don't involve the immune system, but they still cause a lot of outward signs like they are an allergy. But lactose maldigestion and intolerance is probably the most common one. Lactose is found in your dairy products. So maldigestion is just the disease itself. It's caused by the reduced digestion of lactose due to the low availability of lactase. So lactase is an enzyme that's produced naturally in our body that breaks down lactose. Most people have that, but many people, 65% of humans, might have a reduced availability of this lactase, and therefore they have this intolerance when they ingest these dairy products. So here are your signs and symptoms. So easy ways to prevent that would obviously to reduce your intake of lactose or those lactose-containing dairy products, or maybe ingesting a lactase tablet prior to ingesting lactose within a couple hours, and therefore that will help your body to break down the lactose that's found in those dairy products. So there's ways to get around it if we still wanted to have those dairy products that we, sometimes love to have.